Hi, I'm Lewis. I'm a software developer from the UK. For years I've had a keen interest in game development, and recently, during this coronavirus lockdown, I've been inspired by the likes of Devlog, BWDev and Thin Matrix to start logging my own development progress. So come join me as I create new games and develop my game engine. To get you up to speed, I am developing my own game engine with the Monogame framework, trying to create a new game for each feature I want to implement. To date, I've developed sprite management tools, some UI features, and basic collision. My most recent game was a short Easter themed collectathon, which I released to friends, family, and colleagues. The next engine feature I want to develop is pathfinding, starting with a simple agent that can move along a path of nodes. I've decided a tower defense game would work well with a simple pathfinding agent like this, as enemies in tower defense games generally follow simple paths throughout the map. My initial progress on this game is that I've got a basic enemy sprite with a simple pathfinding agent component. When I click a point on the screen, the agent will move towards it, and I'm able to click multiple times to queue up a path that the agent will keep following until it gets to the end. Okay, I'm starting this week implementing some collision performance improvements that I've been thinking about for a while. I'm separating colliders in the collision engine into layers, which can be used for different purposes. This means I don't have to worry about dealing with each other. The layers I currently have are a standard layer, a physics layer, and a navigation layer. This should be really beneficial when the game engine is dealing with large numbers of colliders. After I completed that, I moved on to creating my tower class. Now the aim of the tower is to shoot at an enemy that enters its watch area. So I gave the tower a sprite component and a circular collision area, which would be used to monitor enemies that enter and leave the area. To get the shooting mechanics working, I looked at implementing an elapsed time property to all of my game objects. In the past I've had to implement similar things manually to each object that needed it, so I figured it'd be worth adding to the base game object. I then utilised this to implement a shooting timer for the tower, seen here when the tower turns black for a short period. Once the shooting timer was in place, I needed a projectile for the tower to fire. To implement the projectile, I used my sprite and physics point components, which allowed it to follow a velocity once spawned. I then created a collision event with the enemy to be killed. Following on from yesterday's progress, I wanted to create a sprite for the tower class. The idea I have for the tower is a monk, so I googled for monk pictures to get some inspiration for the sprite. After forgetting to switch to my screen to record the sprite progress, this is the sprite that I've created for the tower. I'm quite happy with this sprite. It fits the same sort of style that the enemy sprite currently uses, and I should start plumbing this into the game. Just before getting sprites into the game, I decided to make a tweak to my sprite sequence manager class to use a generic type instead of strings. This was a small change that I've wanted for a while, since I really didn't like relying on strings and would much rather use an enum. So, using the new tower sprite and the enum for direction, I plumbed in the sprites for the tower, and also plumbed in directional sprites I had for the enemy class. I also wanted the enemy to animate whilst moving, so I looked into creating simple animation frames for the enemy. To help decide how many frames I would need, I actually googled for similar sprites. In this case it was cow sprites. I decided that 4 frames for each direction would work well, and then I did some crude edits to my sprite to have a basic walk animation. The last thing I looked at today was a spawner for the enemies. This spawner creates enemies with a timer and gets them to follow a set path. So far the first enemy follows the path and the rest don't, so that's something I'll have to pick up tomorrow. It's Wednesday, and looking at my enemy spawner, it's clear the path I wanted enemies to follow isn't being copied the way I expected. I thought the game objects would be copied, however only the references are. So in the future I think I'll look into creating a deep copy function for all my game objects. But for now, I'll just recreate the path for each enemy spawn. With my enemies spawning properly, I wanted to give them health, as the current projectile completely wipes them all out. Adding a health parameter to enemies and reducing it by a damage parameter from the projectile works quite well. However, the projectiles can touch enemies for longer than a game tick, so I wanted to expand the projectile to limit the number of hits it can do, and also only affect each enemy once. So I achieved this by having each projectile create a list of enemies it's already collided with, and killing off the projectile when it had hit a certain number of enemies. After completing these tasks, I took a look at my Trello board and realised I needed to define more tasks related to the gameplay, so I took out some paper to draw some game designs. This is the design I've come up with. I want the level to be the main focus of the screen, with a tower UI at the bottom. This UI will let the user buy towers by tapping on them to see details and dragging them into the level. Once a tower is in the level, it can be selected and a tower management window will pop up. I'm pretty happy with these designs and it seems like a good place to end for today. When I start back up again tomorrow, I will start looking at how I can actually implement these features in the game. Today I've taken a look at the designs from yesterday, and the UI is the main thing that I think I need to work on. So I've added some tasks to my Trello board to cover what I think needs implementing. The first UI feature I need to add is a draggable component. I've already got a clicking component from a previous game which required buttons, so I've taken that and I'm trying to expand on it. So I've added functions to register all mouse events with a clickable collider. This took a little bit longer than I expected since I needed to add more detailed parameters for input functions, which required a few changes to my standard input management class. This worked out well, although I suspect I can later simplify this by creating some kind of event args object. Hopefully tomorrow I can build on yesterday's progress. It's Friday and I have added a click function for draggable objects, which would match the position of the object to the mouse position. This works quite well, however there are a few issues I've got with it. For example, dragging one object over the other would make both of the objects eternally snap to the same position, so I'm going to see if I can fix that. So to fix this, I made sure draggable components only would ever snap to the mouse if the object itself has been clicked. As well as that, I've saved an offset for objects relative to the mouse, so that if two objects are being dragged, they don't snap together eternally. I think this week's been a great start to the tower defense game. I've gone from having a simple pathfinding agent to having enemies and towers that can interact with each other. I think my main focus now is the UI for managing the game and designing content such as different towers and levels for the player to go through. Thanks for watching this video. It's great to get into creating videos again, especially with the current lockdown situation. I hope you enjoyed watching. If you did, please leave the video a like, and if you want to see more progress with this game, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you and goodbye.